Hello everyone, my name is Zachary O'Shea, and this is Box of Teeth. Every October for the last few years, I've shared a homebrewed monster per day for Dungeons & Dragons, so this is your monster day for October 12th, 2023. Again here in week 2, what I'm doing is sharing legendary versions of previous Waning Court monsters that I have published, and the reason for this is twofold. One, I get to share 2 monsters with you every day, which I think is pretty cool, and 2, it really gives a chance for folks that are learning to build monsters for their first time, or even a horror-based campaign, or even any D&D campaign or fantasy campaign or whatever role-playing campaign you're running. It gives them a chance to think about, okay, I take an existing monster, I give it a name, I give it a different kind of personality and maybe a few unique abilities, and now it becomes a memorable antagonist for my players. Today what we're going to do is we're going to go over the Grinning Herald, which is a member of the Waning Court. And again, the Waning Court is a family of dark fae that have a very autumn, nightmarish feel. They're folk horror, body horror, and cosmic horror all kind of rolled together. So we're going to go over a Grinning Herald, as well as a pretty horrific legendary version of one here in just a moment. A Grinning Herald at its core is exactly what the name is on the box, as it were. Whether wearing a mortal guise or in its true form, the first thing one notices about this fae is its smile. While pretending to be a person, the fae's grin is warm, charming, almost entrancing. When showing its true colors, the herald's mouth stretches painfully wide, with pearly teeth, large, flat, but holding a cleaver's edge. If you've noticed some of the other creatures I've gone over, this is a common theme that I use in the Waning Court. The fae has corpse gray skin pulled thin over its bony body and jet black eyes within sunken sockets. Even in this horrid form, there's still something beguiling in its intensity in the way that it speaks. Their barreled chests don't actually match the rest of their scarecrow frame either. It is this uncanny feature about their bodies which lends them another important and dangerous aspect within the Waning Court. Yes, they're deceivers and spies and influencers, but they actually produce living thunder to the point where they can shatter eardrums, break bones, vibrate castle stones with just a shout, which makes their proclamations all the easier to hear, but also makes them valuable weapons as needed. In the mortal realm, they're also a bit of a seducer. They're too lowly in rank to find a noble lover, and also too proud of their elevation to slum it with common fae, as it were. To that end, they'll often find lovers among mortal institutions to gain some semblance of power. Aristocrats, famous entertainers, the people that are pulling the purse strings, as it were, such as really wealthy merchants or even clergy, will often be seduced by a Grinning Herald, so again, they have some sort of influence in the mortal world. And if the mortal doesn't work out, they can always bite their head off quite literally as needed. So let's go ahead and take a look at their statistics for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, which are right here. They are a challenge rating 5. They're a medium fae, like most of the Waning Court. They have resistance to lightning, thunder, and weapon attacks that aren't magical or silver. They have magic resistance. They do have some innate spellcasting with Chaos Bolt, Crown of Madness, and Plane Shift Self only, so they can move between the mortal realm and fairyland very easily when they need to carry messages. They all have a bite attack, which is pretty vicious, because again, that is just a giant set of cleavers within their jaw, basically. Many of them use rapiers because they have a high dexterity. They have Horn of Marrow, which is basically a thunder-based breath weapon that they can use periodically. And they also have change shape, so they can change from their grotesque fae form into usually a handsome humanoid form of sun shape. However, whenever they use their bite attack, which literally just rips out of their skin if they look like a human, by the end of that bite attack is done, they're now transformed to be in the horrific, nightmarish fae that they actually are, which is a nice surprise to spring on players. Now, a Grinning Herald is bad enough, and you can usually use those as some sort of serial antagonist in a game, the power behind the throne, as it were, that is influencing mortal politics, but is actually a dark fae almost like a hag in the fact that they look like humanoid women, but more of an aristocratic villain in that sort of way. We're going to cover a more horrific version for our legendary monster today, which is Holloweyes. Holloweyes was blinded after daring to spy on the Lord of Invisible Blades while the Archfey was bathing. Holloweyes isn't really an apt description for this grinning herald, but it's the name that he chose afterwards. His sockets aren't actually empty, but filled with direfly hives that stretch deep into his body without doing a lick of harm to him with this curse that was laid on him by this Archfey. When in human form, though, the illusion of empty holes settles in, and he covers it with a blindfold and explains it as an old battlefield injury to better kind of puff up his fame and his ability with the various people he wants to seduce or control. Holloweyes has taken this maiming in stride and has learned to master the blindness as a weapon to use against others. Through magical means, he robs them of their sight temporarily. He's also made an ally of the foul insects that live inside of his cranium. They serve as both a familiar to him and also a attack he can make in a couple of different various forms against his opponents. So let's go ahead and take a look at his statistics for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. He is challenge rating 6 because he is slightly tougher than a normal Grinning Herald. He does have blind sight, which is limited. He cannot be blinded because he doesn't have eyes to blind. He does have direfly nest, which is very similar to a waning scion. He does have direflies. He can use a swarm of direflies as a familiar, and this makes his blind sight even more dangerous because, of course, with Find Familiar, you can look through your familiar's eyes. So he can look through the swarm's eyes as needed. If they're destroyed, he can regenerate them just like a Find Familiar in a certain amount of time. He does have a bite attack, but instead of using a rapier, because he is a blind man, he uses a direfly sting when needed. So he summons direflies supposedly out of his empty eyes if he's in human form to attack a target. He does also change shape. He does have Horn of Marrow. When we get down to his legendary actions, he of course can bite as a legendary attack. He does also have Consume Sight, so he sends a bevy of direflies to attack the eyes of someone who he wants to be blinded, and they must make a Constitution save or be blinded until the end of their next turn. And his big attack is Outpour, so he just sprays out all of the direflies inside of him and does an AoE psychic damage attack, but cannot move on the next round as he's waiting for all the direflies to flow back into his skull. I hope that comes across as the kind of horrific body horror villain that Holloweyes should be. You can find Holloweyes, along with Grinning Heralds, and every monster for October that I've made previously, along with hundreds of other horror-based monsters for Dungeons & Dragons at boxofteeth.blogspot.com. In addition, if you're interested in the other horror role-playing game projects that I have that have nothing to do with Dungeons & Dragons, or the horror fiction that I write, including Grease Paint right there, which is about a killer clown. It's a fun read for the holiday season, and by that holiday I mean Halloween, not Christmas, but you know, you do your thing. You can always go to www.zacharyoshay.com. Again, I really appreciate your time and your attention, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day, and I'll see you all again tomorrow.